Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more buckshot testing, and today we've got another very interesting combination to try out, and it's one that a lot of you guys have requested to see, and I definitely want to test it as well to see what kind of results we can get out of it, because in theory this should be a very good combination together. But I think the big question mark is, well, how are these particular shells going to perform through this choke? It should work out for us, but based on some other stuff that we've tested with these shells and stuff recently, we just don't know until we actually try it. So for the shell I've got out here today to test, I brought out some more of the Hornady Varmint Express shells. They are a 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 24 pellet load of 4 buck, moving about 1,350 feet per second. And they do have the Versatite wad, which is essentially Hornady's version of a flight control wad. And both of them are pretty much identical for the most part. And I think that Versatite wad is probably going to be the deciding factor going through this choke and how they actually pattern. So definitely a very interesting shell that we know has potential to pattern good, but we'll see what happens through today's setup combo. And as for today's setup that I've got to run them through, I brought out the Remington 870 special purpose with a 24-inch barrel on it, and I put this choke in here, which is the Kicks Buck Kicker full choke. This particular one measures out right at a 693 constriction, and this Kicks Buck Kicker has done very, very nicely with the vast majority of buckshot shells that we've ran through it. So in theory, it should work out with these as well. But if you haven't seen, we recently tested those Hornady shells through the 835 with a Kicks 680 choke, and they did some really strange things, and I believe it has to do with the porting on these Kicks chokes, which is known for banging up wads just a little bit. So with this being a little bit less constriction than we had previously tested, and this choke being designed for buckshot shells similar to this, I'm thinking we should be okay and it should do well. But if we see weird things, it's probably going to be a conflict between the porting in this choke and that Versatite wad, if I had to take a guess right now. But we'll see what happens. So as for today's test, everything will be the same as we usually do it for these buckshot tests. I've got the big sheet of paper set up at 40 yards. I've also got the chronograph so we can get our velocity out of the shell. And I've got the templates to lay up over the target when we go check out our results as well. So let's get you guys a view of this target, and we'll take this shot and see just what kind of performance we're able to get from these Varmint Express shells through this 870 and Buck Kicker full choke. This should kind of maybe be almost the perfect shotgun coyote setup, but how does it actually pattern? I don't know. Let's go over here and take a shot and see what kind of results we get. Alright, so that round gave us 1386 through the chrono. The boss claim is 1350. However, we have typically seen a touch over 1400 out of these shells through like the 835 and the 1187. So considering the fact that we now have a 24-inch barrel on that 870, I think that 1386 is pretty realistic based on what we've seen out of these shells. So looking good up here as far as our velocity goes, but what kind of a pattern did we actually get down at 40 yards? And did the shells actually work like we wanted them to through that Kicks Buck Kicker choke? Let's go take a look and see what we got. Alright, well, now we're down here at our 40-yard paper, and this is what we got. Obviously, we were a touch low here on the paper, but that's why we use such a big backer. That way we can actually see our pattern. Now, for reference, the white dot was my point of aim. The paper is 36 inches wide by roughly about 42 inches tall, and we had 23 out of the 24 pellets actually on our paper, and I would hazard a guess that number 24 is either that hole right there or this hole down here. So ultimately, I think we still had 24 of them that actually hit our board and stuff down here. And I gotta say, that is the best performance that we've seen out of these shells, hands down. I did measure from the two farthest points across, which is essentially from left to right on that pattern. And it gave us right at 19.5 inches of spread. So at 40 yards, 19.5 inches with 23 pellets of 4 buck is pretty good. So yeah, that is definitely the best combo that we've tried with these shells so far. There's no doubt about that. That's going to absolutely hammer whatever you're trying to shoot with them all day long. Now, is it a perfectly uniform or even spread? No, not really. It's a little bit wider than it is taller, and we do have a couple of bigger voids in the middle of the pattern there that don't have pellets in there. But the overall size of the pattern, I mean, you've got everything right there. So definitely pretty impressive looking in my book, and not a whole lot we can really complain about on that one. I would say they did about as good as what they could have done through that butt kicker choke. So looking pretty decent on the blank paper, but let's throw a couple templates up and get a little bit of reference as to how they would have actually done in some more real life type of scenarios. Alright, so here's our 10-inch circle, and if we line it up with what would essentially be the main core of the actual pattern, we had 7 pellets that would have definitely been within a 10-inch circle, and if we move that template just a little bit either direction, we would gain a pellet or two. So call it 7 to 10 pellets, depending on exactly where we place this within a 10-inch circle. Out of a 24 pellet load, I'd call that pretty decent, and plenty good enough to be able to get a good amount of pellets in the vitals of an animal, that's for sure. But speaking of animals, let's throw a couple templates up and get a little bit of an idea of what it would have looked like in an actual hunting type of scenario. Alright, so we'll start off here with a deer template. Now, I know not everybody likes to use 4-buck for deer, but they are absolutely capable of doing it if you wanted to. And with this kind of a pattern, yeah, you would absolutely have a dead deer there all day long. You have pretty much all of your pellets within the deer template at 40 yards. So for those of you that would actually take these particular shells on a deer hunt, I think you're going to be pretty well off. That deer is not going to go very far, if anywhere at all, that's for sure. And with that kind of a pattern, I think you're probably going to look at running out of energy before you actually run out of pattern capability. So looking pretty good on a deer if you were to deer hunt with these. But now let's switch over to the hog template, which I think is probably a little bit more commonly used for these shells, is that hog to coyote type of range, and that template will give us a good idea of that. So let's throw that template up and see what that one looks like. Alright, so here's that hog template, and it is pretty well the same story. You have pretty much your entire pattern within that hog. So yeah, absolutely good enough to take on a pig hunt. And if you were to predator hunt with these shells, for a fox or coyote or something, they would be a little bit smaller than this hog template, and clearly you would have plenty good enough of a pattern for those guys as well. So definitely looking very nice here as for a pattern today. Coming into it, didn't know exactly how well it was going to work with that kind of wad through that choke, but clearly I think it did pretty well. I don't know if these shells can give us a whole lot better than this in the grand scheme of things. So definitely, I don't think there's much we can really complain about today. That is a very usable pattern all day long. Okay, and here's that Versatite wad, and as you can see, if you have any experience with the flight control wads from Federal, then you can tell that this is essentially the same thing, really. There's really not a whole lot different about it. And this one performed pretty well overall. The only thing I'm really noticing is this one pedal over here didn't quite flare out as much as these other two. But ultimately, I don't think it really made a huge difference in our pattern today. Maybe that's part of the reason why we hit a little bit low and to the right, but I don't think it affected the actual quality of the pattern. But overall, it looks very good for going through a kicks choke with porting like that, especially based on what we saw the last time we tested these through a kicks choke. This one did perfectly fine, and I'm not seeing anything that I'm worried about either. It looks like it held up just fine, and looks like it would perform pretty consistently overall. So definitely nothing too weird or special to see here. When it comes to the wad, I think it pretty well did exactly what it was supposed to do. Alright, y'all. Well, what did you think about that pattern right there? I'd call it a win for today, that's for sure. That is going to get the job done on anything from groundhogs all the way up to deer out at 40 yards. And I kind of think that that is essentially the pattern that they were kind of going for with these shells. I don't know that we can get a whole lot better than that. So coming into it, I didn't quite know how it was going to work with that kicks choke being ported and stuff. But once again, that butt kicker choke showed us why it might actually be worth it over just a standard flush full choke or something like that. So I guess let me know your thoughts about it down in the comments. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of these Hornady Varmint Express shells? And if so, what kind of results have you seen from them? And is there another choke or setup combo that you might want to see us try with those shells? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like to. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.